The New York Times published this story, how the El Paso killer echoed the incendiary words of conservative media stars. Yes, I saw many people in journalism tweeting about this, saying, here's the proof, this guy was radicalized by Fox News, yada, yada, yada. And you know what's really annoying about it? Yeah, he also echoed the words of liberal stars. I mean, he echoed the words of like Andrew Yang, for instance, which is interesting because Yang has seen a lot of support on places like 4chan. Whether or not you think it's real or not, some people have said it's fabricated. I'm not going to make that accusation. But we've seen people across the aisle support Yang for addressing a lot of these issues. Here's the thing. What does the New York Times do? And we'll read this. They show invade in the manifesto. I'm sorry. These are quotes from conservatives. Invasion over and over and over again. Oh my, stars and garters. But did any of these people actually read the manifesto? Because I'll tell you what I did when I first saw this. I searched for universal basic income. Did it come up? Nope. Joe Rogan talks about it all the time. He's not on the right, although they like to accuse him. Andrew Yang is running for a Democrat. He talked about automation. Again, Yang. He talked about health care. He was talking about universal health care, not a conservative talking point. And he's talking about the environment. Again, not much of a conservative talking point. I could write an article saying how the El Paso killer echoed the incendiary words of liberal media stars and show all the debate about healthcare and government programs. Now, let's be real. This dude, assuming the manifesto is real, which has not been confirmed yet, but we believe it to be the case, he was driven by a white identity nationalist mindset. I think it's fair to point out and heavily criticize. I think the only reason he went and did what he did was because of white identitarian extremist ideology. And there you have it. But it's just unfair to act like identitarianism is exclusive to the right. They highlight only the right-wing portions of it and they ignore the left. Let me stress, he talked in his manifesto about Democrats giving health care to immigrants. Right, so I have this one from the Washington Examiner. Has anyone actually read the El Paso manifesto, which goes over a lot of the stuff he talked about? Environment, for instance. Let's pull up, let's see, healthcare. Recycling, healthcare, sustainability, and more. Large portions of the manifesto simply could not be more un-Trumpian. The issue was, what made this guy go nuts was not right-wing talking points, it was identitarian ideology. What we saw was a mix of the right, for sure, call him right-wing, whatever, I don't even know what that means anymore. It was white identitarianism. But identitarianism is being propped up in the mainstream by the left. So let me stress something to you. When you have young, disenfranchised, angry young men who can't find work, who are dropping out of school, they're being berated in the media all day for being men, and then you start adding white to that, don't be surprised when young white men become identitarians because of your rhetoric. And Brett Weinstein talks about this, and Jordan Peterson talks about this. When you push this anti-white rhetoric, don't be surprised when you inflame and incense people who feel like they have no choice and they go nuts. I'm not blaming those who are calling out white supremacy, quite the opposite. I'm blaming those who are targeting regular Americans for simply the color of their skin. By all means, call out these wackos. But I want to stress, man, and I'll probably get flack for it. This is what the media does. Once again, pointing the finger in only one direction, refusing to reflect on their own contribution. The New York Times, for instance, hired Sarah Jeong, an avowed anti-white identitarian. Now, sure, you can claim that it was just all of her racist tweets was just her trying to use the words of her oppressors. Whatever, man, I don't care. Sarah Jeong, for years, put out anti-white racist posts on Twitter. Racism, judging people based on the color of their skin, a bad thing. And then they say, that's not really racist because privilege plus power. I don't care about that definition. You can take your wacko definition and I don't care what you do with it. That's not the definition of racism. This woman, Sarah Jeong, was hired by the New York Times, and white identitarians celebrated, saying that it was a good thing because it was going to result in white racial awakening, which is a bad thing. What we need in this country is recognition that we are Americans. And as Americans, we are afforded the same rights as everybody else. In fact, even non-Americans, regardless of the color of your skin, you're afforded rights under the Constitution. When you are here, you are protected by the Constitution, the people. For whatever it's worth, right? You're not a citizen. There's a lot of things you can't have. You can be deported, but you have free speech. You have certain rights. And I think this mostly is in reference to like tourists. When you come here as a tourist, you are protected under the Constitution, period. We are Americans. It doesn't matter what you look like. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter if you're rich, poor, white, black, Mexican, Latino, immigrant, non-immigrant, born here, Muslim, Christian. Americans are afforded these rights. And it is the racists pushing the racial divide that's the problem. And when you see when the left refuses to call out the they're crossing the line, this is what we see. This is the perfect evidence of it. Incendiary words of conservative media stars. Okay, let me say this. It's true. We saw a lot of conservatives say invasion. The president did too. And this was the rhetoric used in the manifesto. And I think it does play a role. I think it absolutely does. I think everyone deserves some of that blame. I even think I do. We're in a really tough spot right here. And I thought about this a lot. Listen, people accuse me. They say, Tim, I've been told I'm producing right-wing clickbait. And my response to that is, first of all, I put the summation of the video in the title. Like, clickbait is a reference to leaving out information to force people to click, to trick them into doing it. I'm not doing that. I'm just covering stories I find personally interesting. And they say, yeah, but it's like targeting the right. I'll be like, no, I disagree. It's just my opinion. In fact, I would say a decent amount of the people who watch me are actually moderates who are either to the center left or center right, going back and forth. Just right there in the middle. And yes, some Trump supporters, and yes, some liberals, but mostly not the far left. And as Vox recognized, there is a left versus center and right thing going on. But I recognize how people see my content. And I recognize they get angry by it and they'll accuse me of these things. But I, of course, think I'm doing the right thing, challenging these lies and these narratives. But of course, no matter what you do, it's going to contribute. And I have no idea how to stop that. I will call it out, though, thinking I'm doing my best. I'm sure a lot of people on the left think they're doing the same thing. But here's reality as I see it. The left is equally culpable for pushing identitarianism. You can't have the New York Times hiring someone who for years made vile and disgusting anti-white comments and then be shocked that all of a sudden there's white people forming identitarian groups or joining white nationalists who are actually using their identity as like their first and foremost policy position. You did that. You encouraged that. It's people like me, the anti-identitarian types, who are saying, dude, I get it. Okay? Identity politics can be okay. Civil rights, good thing. LGBTQ rights, absolutely. But you are taking it to the extreme. You are defending Antifa. You are defending avowed racists and hiring them and giving them these jobs. And it is making everything worse. You have people like Reza Aslan calling for the eradication of Trump's base. You have people like Sean King calling for overt acts of terror. You have the left, presidential candidates saying Trump is a white supremacist. You are making this worse. And what can we expect to see? Nothing. They'll keep doing it. Listen, I don't know how you define what left and right is anymore. I really don't understand. And I mean that. The Anti-Defamation League claims that black identity extremism is left-wing. How does that make sense? They hold nearly identical views to the alt-right. They just replace white for black. So what makes it left? I have no idea. I guess, when it comes to the idea of what left and right is, the media typically just says white racism is right-wing, which I don't seem to understand because this guy, who was a white identitarian, was talking about universal basic income, socialist, universal healthcare, socialist, and environmentalism, typically not associated with the right in terms of their policies. Trump's actually been attacked for, his policies on the environment. EPA, I don't want to get into all that stuff. But as they mentioned, certainly not Trumpian. Now look, I'm not going to sit here and play a game because I know people on the left are going to be like, Tim's trying to placate and downplay this guy's. No. This guy was a whack job. He's responsible for everything he did. Nobody else. He went nuts. And now I know I'm getting in trouble because it's not even about guns. It's about a dude driven to insanity by hearing all of this rhetoric in politics, going nuts. And yes, conservatives contributed to that. They absolutely did. But does that mean it's any of their fault? It doesn't. It is not Trump's fault for saying invasion, nor is it the left's fault for saying automation and universal health care. But the New York Times is absolutely going to point it in one direction. So you know what, man? Expect to see more. Look, they say language like invasion and the replacement of Americans has increasingly become a regular part of Fox News broadcasts, Rush Limbaugh shows, and other prominent conservative media. And it was the Democratic debates where they said they were going to give away government resources to non-citizens. So it takes two to tango, man. If there wasn't, and I mean this, look, when you look at these street battles, and we're going to see some insanity on August 17th, it's conservatives and right-wing groups showing up, and then Antifa shows up, and then a fight breaks out. I'm not going to point a finger and say who started and who doesn't. That's irrelevant. The point is, if Antifa didn't show up, nothing would happen. I tell you this now, if the Proud Boys say they're going to do a rally and they show up with their little American flags waving them in the air and no one else shows up, they'll stand around in the park sipping on bottles of water, then go to the bar and get drunk and go home. End of story. Nothing happens. There's no recruiting. There's no violence. It's when the left shows up to engage and start the fight. It takes two to tango. And the New York Times, I can't say I'm surprised. They hired Sarah Jung and other avowed identitarians. So don't be surprised when the paper of record embraces this anti-white rhetoric, that it inflames people who are white and disenfranchised, and they become terrified, angry, and violent. I'm not letting conservatives off the hook. Everybody is playing the same culture war game, myself included. But please, New York Times, look in the mirror. Next segment will be tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thanks for hanging out. Podcast will be at 6 p.m. I'll see you all next time.